Good evening. Thank you for waiting, and thank you very much. Thank you all so much for joining us for this event, Censorship and Related Acts of Authoritarian Desperation. I'm Yuki Miyamoto, Vincent DePaul Professor and the Director of the DePaul Humanities Center. I'm delighted to share that this gathering is the result of a collaboration among several departments and programs across campus, which enables us to invite distinguished faculty whose expertise spans multiple disciplines and geographical areas. This event is part of DePaul's Present Tense series, initiated last year by several faculty members last year, especially Dr. Anna Suchak. It is also generously supported by the Department of Modern Languages, Latin American and Latino Studies, the Women's Center, and the Society of Vincent DePaul Professors. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to the Dialogue Collaborative, a university-wide interdisciplinary initiative that seeks to recognize the benefits of constructive conflict and to embed principles and the practices of dialogue across the DePaul community. Dialogue is foundational to a healthy democracy. Meaningful dialogue requires not only a shared commitment to accurate and responsible engagement with information, but also the presupposition that participants meet one another on equal footing, regardless of differences in status, identity, or institutional power, without fearing of consequences. Censorship, by contrast, takes many forms, yet it consistently operates within asymmetries of power. Efforts to expose or challenge these power dynamics often invite retribution, resulting in the restriction of public access to accurate and reliable information. Before I forget, I also have some information about the book. Books are available at the desk outside, and these distinguished authors are having books, and also Brenda's book is unfortunately not available as physical copies, but the information is out there. The QR code is unfortunately not available, but here is the slip, and we have some of these outside, and it has the title of the book, so please check out. So, with these themes of censorship in mind, today's panelists will draw from their respective areas of expertise to reflect on their research and lived experiences. This rich conversation will be moderated by Dr. Anne Russo. Before she introduces our panelists, I would like to briefly introduce Dr. Russo. Anne Russo is a professor in the Department of Women's and Gender Studies here at DePaul. Her scholarship, teaching, and organizing focus on queer, anti-racist, and feminist movement approaches to building alliances and coalitions for social change. Her most recent book, Feminist Accountability: Disrupting Violence and Transforming Power, explores transformative justice, prison abolition, and community accountability as practices that cultivate communal healing, intervention, accountability, and transformation in response to systemic, intimate, interpersonal, and state violence. She's also the author of Feminist Communities Engaged in Resisting Violence in 2007, Taking Back Our Lives, A Call to Action in the Feminist Movement in 2001, and the co-editor of Talking Back and Acting Out in 2002, and the Third World Women and the Feminist Perspectives in 1990. She has also published numerous book chapters, articles in academic journals, and feminist periodicals. So please join me to welcome our guests and the moderator.
Okay, Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, welcome everyone, and it's good to see you all here. This evening, in this, very powerful historical moment that we find ourselves in, I think it's really good to come together to talk about censorship in times of authoritarian desperation and in authoritarian times. As we know, censorship is not new. You can trace all its ebbs and flows across history and across contexts. And yet we are in a moment where in the US and across the world, there's a powerful resurgence of censorship in the service of authoritarian rule. It's occurring at all levels and across many contexts: educational and research institutions, hospitals, national parks, libraries, museums, corporations, newspapers, social media, internet, publishing houses, and many more areas, even in our own lives, the way, because of what's going on, we censor ourselves, right? In our conversations with people who don't agree with us, including in our families and friendship networks. We are witnessing and being impacted by efforts to censor speech, for instance, that challenges unjust power, occupations, and wars. For example, the suppression of Palestinian and pro-Palestinian speech and protest found on college campuses in the midst of genocide, including here at DePaul, as well as the arrest and punishment of journalists reporting on ICE raids, and the punishment and criminalization of those standing in support of their neighbors to prevent such deportations. We are witnessing and being impacted by efforts to erase people's identities, knowledge, and histories. For example, the dismantling of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, at 439 campuses in 48 states, or the efforts to remove Black, Indigenous, queer histories, as well as climate change science from national parks and museums. We are witnessing and being impacted by efforts to demonize, criminalize, and deport whole populations, i.e. the ICE deportation campaigns, the travel bans, the revocation of international student visas, etc. We are witnessing efforts to completely erase some people's stories and lives. For example, since 2021, 23,000 books have been banned in public libraries and schools. Books about race, racism, LGBTQ characters and themes, and more. This resurgence of efforts worldwide is, I feel like it's just alarming, right? It's scary, it's like disturbing, and every day you open up the paper and there's another incident of people being punished or surveilled or kicked out or harmed in some way for speaking out about, often in the service of justice, or challenging unjust systems and mistreatment and etc. So I see all that happening, and so I'm also see this as a call every day as well to a critical awareness and protracted individual and collective refusal and resistance. And the resistance is strong. I think it's everywhere. It's in all the places we don't think it is. People are resisting, everyday people, in all kinds of ways. And it's the ongoing lawsuits and legal challenges, the protests, from very small, like a group of people on a street corner, to massive protests. The many people, groups, and institutions who refuse to comply, right? Who say, no, we're not following that. The coalitional solidarity marches in support of Palestinian freedom, immigrant rights and justice, and trans and queer liberation. Like, I was really heartened by the Love March that took place 50 miles in North Carolina. I think it was last week. I mean, people are organizing everywhere. Also, the spreading and underground circulation of banned books in areas where the books have been banned. Tonight, we have 3 scholars and writers speaking to 3 distinct contexts where the struggle over speech and expression have been volatile and compelling. These talks this evening are going to set a foundation for the conversation that will follow. So after I introduce the speakers, each will present their work for about maybe 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A and a conversation. So I'll begin with Professor Michael Berry, who is a professor of contemporary Chinese cultural studies and the director of the Center for Chinese Studies at UCLA. He is the author of several books on Chinese film and culture, including a book that he'll discuss tonight, Translation, Disinformation, and Wuhan Diary, Anatomy of a Trans-Pacific Disinformation Campaign. He's also the author of Speaking in Images and a History of Pain. He's a Guggenheim Fellow and has served as a film consultant and a juror for numerous film festivals, including the Golden Horse and the Fresh Wave. He is also a translator of numerous novels, including Han Song's Hospital Trilogy, To Live, The Song of Everlasting Sorrow, Soft Burial, and Remains of Life. Tonight he's going to share details of the banning of Wuhan Diary, which was a 2020 chronicle of the pandemic and lockdown in Wuhan, China. He will talk about the ways the book was politicized, attacked, and suppressed, and what we can learn from that. The next speaker will be Sarah Miriam Schulman, who is a novelist, playwright, nonfiction writer, screenwriter, and AIDS historian, and a professor at Northwestern University. She is the author of a number of books, including The Fantasy and Necessity of Solidarity, Let the Record Show, A Political History of ACT UP New York, and Conflict is Not Abuse, Overstating Harm, Communal Responsibility, and the Duty of Repair. She is on the advisory board of Jewish Voice for Peace, and she's the director of Northwestern University's MFA program. She will be talking about how censorship has been constituted in the past and how it has been transformed today. And then our final speaker is Brenda A. Muñoz, who holds a PhD in social sciences, communication studies from the University of Antwerp, Belgium, and a PhD in humanistic studies with a specialization in communication and cultural studies from Tecnológico de Monterrey. She is a level 1 member of the National System of Researchers and a full research professor at the Faculty of Communication Sciences of the Autonomous University of Coahuila. Her research focuses on communication for social development, film studies, reception studies, alternative content, and emerging media. And she's a visiting professor here at DePaul University's Faculty of Sociology right in this moment. Tonight, she will be talking about banning images and sounds from Mexico, from defending Mexican identity in the 1920s, when the government banned American movies that harmfully depicted Mexican people, to the current efforts of American tourists to ban the actual sounds and presence of Mexicans in Mexico to improve their tourist experience. Okay, so please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Now, in a sense, banned books are elite censorship. After all, you have to be published and on the shelves in order to be removed. The first level of censorship is socially determined. It takes place at birth. Being born into illiteracy, infant and child mortality, being born into a war zone where you can lose your life to genocide, like thousands as we speak. Being born into poverty that keeps your perspective from ever surfacing. Or you could be one of the most literate and educated diasporas in the world and grow to become a grassroots journalist in Gaza, only to be assassinated by the hundreds so that no one will ever hear your story. Who you are born to be is the biggest determinant in who gets heard and who gets silenced. You can be born into any class or place, but be so traumatized into silence that the confusion and fear rooted in the unjust experiences you have endured make impossible the focus and concentration required to communicate, even though yours are precisely the experiences that need to be heard. The third level of censorship is the imposition of silence through maintenance of the status quo. For example, linguistic. You can be an original thinker and conceptualizer who's raised in languages that have no publishing apparatus. Or the exclusion of unheard points of view. You can be the wrong category of human to be listened to, unless you mimic the ruling group's language about themselves. Now, the fourth layer of censorship is marketplace censorship. Our book publishing industry is one that favors entertainment over art. Entertainment is telling people what they already know, and art is expanding how we think. And America's two most lucrative exports are corporate entertainment and weapons, and our highest grossing entertainment is advertisement for weapons. All of this is upheld through a system of fake rewards imposing untrue standards to market corporate entertainment. I don't know if I'm the only one here who sees quote reviews and quote features and all kinds of fake journalism telling me that a book or movie or play is terrific and the best. And then I read it or go to see it and it's awful and has a negative message for our time. For example, for weeks I've been told that the best movie of the year is One Battle After Another. So I went to see it and discovered that in the very historic moment when we must rise up together or be destroyed by the fascist cataclysm that is the US government, we are being told that the best movie is one in which activists are crazy, violence-loving idiots who could not find their ways out of a paper bag, and that black women leaders are the craziest and most craven of them all. Wrap all this propaganda against activism and against black women with a moving father-daughter story, and the real message is being expertly packaged and sold. Year after year, the most boring, repetitive books are sold as the best, while the ones that give us what we really need remain passed around in underground culture. I marvel at the vast industries of writers who've been rewarded for having nothing to say. Censorship is living in a society that confuses familiarity with quality and rewards repetition while condemning innovation as wrong. So if you were born in the right geographic location, access the necessary tools, are able to find enough focus to produce words that are legible, and can find someone inside the machine who wants to brand themselves with your object, you can get published. If the existing object is recognized and approved of by pre-publication filters, because there are many books that are published that you've never heard of or seen, and fit the self-branding needs of booksellers, your book, one of many that have been published, may be among the few selected to be made available to the public. And then and only then can your book be officially banned, while all the silenced voices you left behind continue in a silence that has no name. And if you're really lucky, you could be branded banned, which can serve as an additional marketing tool, especially if the book is already well known. So that is why I say that a banned book is an elite category of censorship. Its publication was not an objective, neutral event in the first place. Now, this fascist cataclysm I mentioned, in which we currently live together, has many consequences on what we hear, how we think, and what we are willing to say. We already know that people are being deported, fired, and arrested for their social media posts, that tens of thousands of people have been deported. Some of these people have died in custody and have died for protesting those deportations. That in short, there are consequences for our speech right now that are material, social, and lethal. My observation is that at the institutional level, these punishments and repressions are introduced by the unification of the government and the billionaire class, and they are being enforced by the capitulation of the administrative class, people who are in authority positions, most elected officials, but not all, many people who run museums, universities, corporate law firms, religious institutions, publishing houses, theaters, film, and TV production. Most of the people who control these venues are complicit right now with watering down reality, with bringing repetition, the exclusion of many realms of experience from representation, and making grotesque deals with this corrupt and immoral government, including my own university, Northwestern, which signed an insane and dishonest deal with the Trump administration that, among many repellent elements, adhered on to the administration's executive order declaring that trans people do not exist, and mandates all students to take a required training where they learn that anti-Zionists are the same as the Ku Klux Klan. My response is to become faculty advisor to the trans students and to the anti-Zionist Jewish group Jewish Voice for Peace. My strategy is not to change a single thing about what I say, how I act, or how I teach. Now, clearly, I have the ability to take this stance because of all kinds of social protections and risks I'm willing to take. But I also have lived a life of being a completely openly lesbian, fighting for abortion rights, fighting for queer liberation, fighting for people with AIDS, and being an active friend of Palestine for many years. So my way of life has prepared me for this moment. I observe that people who have not been clear in their past have more difficulty being clear now. And yet, more and more people are finding their voices because we are in an emergency, and I would like to name two of them right now. First, I watched an interview with someone then known as the, quote, woman in the red coat. This is the person who bravely stood risking her life to film Border Patrol agents murdering Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. She easily could have lost her life, but she followed her instinct, her impulse for truth, to stand and witness and hold her phone in front of her face, making herself a defenseless target. Turns out she's a blonde woman in her 30s named Stella Carlson, a typical Scandinavian name for the Minnesota region. Stella Carlson's career is to face paint children at birthday parties. Anderson Cooper asked her, "How long have you been an activist?" And she answered, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She rose to the call of the historic moment. I also want to shout out my fellow New Yorkers who elected Mamdani to be our mayor, and in that action did not hearken back to a return to the dysfunctional and unjust system that we all lived in before Trump, did not concede to the centrist mainstream Democratic Party, but the voters of New York City reached ahead to a futuristic vision of a world that we actually want to live in, one that he may not be able to achieve, but after instituting free childcare within 10 days of taking office, he's now calling to tax the rich who feed off our city and don't give back. Although the compromised US media is censoring the already censored, and we do not have clear knowledge of every place and every milieu that is speaking out and rebelling against the collaboration of the administrative class, every time I teach a Palestinian book in my classroom, I know I'm giving my students tools and normalizing a kind of fight back of ideas and speech. And I want to close here with a list of things, of actions that I can recommend for how to move forward if you aren't already. Our best tactic is to build relationships and community infrastructure in defiance of the massive imposition of corporate culture that is being forced on us daily. So one, this is the time to join pre-existing organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, Students for Justice in Palestine, Democratic Socialists of America, your union, your block association, your tenant association. You don't have to agree with everything they do. This is not the time for perfection. And if you hate everyone, get together with 3 other people once a week and read the newspaper. Build in-person relationships. 2, one of the problems with the left is that sometimes we do things that don't work, and then the next time we do it again exactly the same way. If something doesn't work, don't do it again. For example, marching around in the rain and then standing in the rain, listening to speeches in which people tell you things you already know. That does not work. Instead, organize campaigns. A campaign is when you have a reasonable, winnable, and doable demand, and you do actions to pressure the powers that be to enact your reasonable solution. Actions that are only expressive but are not tied to a winnable demand ultimately waste people's energy. But actions tied to demands is how we have victories, and movements need victories. 4, remember that every community in this nation is under attack. And that means that having everyone agree on analysis and strategy is impossible. Therefore, the way we build big tent politics in which all kinds of people and experiences can coexist is through radical democracy. Radical democracy is the recognition of difference with a bottom line. And each one of us has our own bottom line because we're different. Political movements that insist that everyone agree or use the same words or follow the same strategies have all failed historically because people are different and can only be where they're at. And real leadership helps people be effective from where they are at. If you don't like someone else's proposed action, don't waste your time trying to make them be like you. Instead, organize your own action. Simultaneity of response is the winning strategy. Based on who we are and how we understand our own lives, we each know what we need, and if we commit to being effective in our own realm, we will have a large, impactful whole. Thank you so much.
In the 1920s, the Mexican state banned U.S. films to protect the nation from harmful imagery and harmful stereotypes. It seemed like that a century later, authorities also wanted to erase bandas from the beaches because they were harmful. But then, who decides if something is harmful or not? These two cases, apparently disconnected, bring us to the very core of censorship, its complexities, and why it is so difficult to fight against it. Regarding cinema, censorship is based on the idea that the movies we watch can harm their recipients. I bring up here a quote by John Stuart Mill that says that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against its will is to prevent harm to others. Cinema was considered a public entertainment for the masses, and it was considered that uneducated people would read movies straight up and would believe that what they were watching was real and not a representation of reality. So if American movies were depicting Mexican characters as thieves and villains, people would think that Mexico was full of thieves and villains. Any similarity with ongoing ideas might be just a coincidence. Anyway, so the obvious solution to prevent that idea spreading was to excise the idea. The notion of censorship refers to the suppression of content based on the claim that such content might damage its recipients, as I said before. In cinema, it can be done either by cutting parts of the movie, banning the movie, or by superimposition of something else to conceal it. Another way of solving that problem would be to forbid the exhibition of such movies or to restrict its commerce. But the problem with censorship is that it not only hides content, ideas, and information, it creates a truth regime based on the authentic powers held by legitimized institutions like the state, the church, or a censorship board. Fun fact, did you know Chicago's censorship board was the first one established in the US? It was founded in 1907. The Mexican Office of Film Censorship was established more than 10 years later in 1919 and was aimed to limit the distribution of derogatory films mainly from American origin. Now, the typical flow of censorship is top-down, but as it is mainly related to power, it can also flow in different ways through our social system. This also means that we as spectators can also have the power to censor. And if we have the power to do so, we certainly can overcome censorship too. We'll come back to that in a moment. So the social distribution of power creates groups that claim to know what is better for the audiences, putting before the principle of greater good and hiding themselves behind legitimized institutions. A quote by Catherine McKinnon reminds us that the operative definition of censorship accordingly shifts from government silencing what powerless people say to powerful people violating powerless people into silence and hiding behind the power of the state. In the 1920s, as I mentioned before, we experienced a diplomatic battle between Mexico and the US regarding these harmful stereotypes that I also mentioned before. Here we are talking about vertical state censorship based on concern and exercised by authority. The motive for said censorship was linked to a nationalist campaign of Mexican state that claimed to protect Mexico's dignities. Most orders to impede exhibition pertain to a single movie, but some of the memos mandate embargoes on distributors too. In 1922, President Álvaro Obregón first asked for the removal of a series of offensive movies to Paramount. And he even notified the distributor that they would face consequences if they didn't act. So, as Paramount refused to withdraw its movies, an official ban on all Paramount films was decreed. This may have factored the formation of the MPDA, Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America Association, founded to regulate the film industry in the US. Just after their first meeting, a resolution was approved condemning thoughtless portrayals of Mexicans. And yet, movies with offending content continue to be exhibited freely in the US. Over here, you can see the poster of a newsreel series called Villa, Dead or Alive, produced by Eagle Film Manufacturing Company based in Chicago and producing company based on Jacksonville. It followed the American soldiers marching into Mexico on Villa's trail, just after Pancho Villa raided the border town of Columbus. According to Moya Lockett, these kind of movies capitalize with the intrigue this character produced in the American audiences, but also aim to promote patriotism in Chicago audiences prior to World War I. On the other side, the distribution of this movie was banned in Mexico because it denigrated the revolution, meaning it went against the narrative that President Álvaro Obregón and Plutarco Elias Calles were trying to establish in Mexico. This calls again the attention to why censorship also produces a truth regime. Censorship was enforced in Mexico through public entertainment inspectors who often found the film exhibitors were cutting off the credits of the movie to evade the prohibition. It's relevant to mention that some of these inspectors were truly looking out for the good of audiences, as was the case with Pablo de León in Saltillo, who, along with his reports regarding banned movies, he urged the municipality to watch for the hygiene in movie theaters and regulate the prices of the showings. Some banned movies were not harmful at all, but were uncomfortable for the government, as was the case of the newsreel reporting the funerals of Archbishop Moray del Rio and Bishop Valdespino. This order came at the height of the Cristero Uprising, a violent conflict between 1926 and 1929. This conflict arose in response to the government's anti-Catholic policies. Archbishop Moray del Rio had been the most prominent voice of Catholic discontent, and he was arrested by the regime and he was sent into exile to San Antonio, Texas. By stopping the exhibition of his funerals in Mexico, the government was trying to prevent the spread of the people's discontent. But on the forefront, they would say they were protecting the separation of church and state. Other forms of cultural regulation will be found throughout the 20th centuries. For instance, in the 40s and 50s, movie posters and lobby cards of films were also censored, mainly by superimposition, and they were aiming to protect morality. These actions were based on the idea that people at the lobby were part of the public space, but when they get into the exhibition room, they had privacy. Over here we have an example of La Diosa Arrodillada that shows the original poster versus the poster that was put into the lobby theater and the lobby card. But I think the other one is more obvious, the censorship over there. As you can see, the rest of the background figure are concealed. In the 60s and 70s, we found several movies prohibited by the church, either because it depicted profane symbols or because it threatened the church as an institution. The scene we see here corresponds to the movie Viridiana by Louis Buñuel, where the Last Supper allegory colliding with the backgrounds of sin behavior was considered sacrilegious. The way the church used to enforce said prohibition was mainly by reporting through their bulletins which movies were recommended for a good Catholic. In Saltillo, this bulletin was called El Parroquial, and it's important to note that it also had a phone line with the authorized programming. From the 90s and throughout the 90s, or maybe to present time, it was more obvious that media was a political tool of the state. The suppression of news was common, and powerful media groups such as Televisa failed to fulfill its ultimate purpose to serve community. The Tlatelolco massacre was never truly reported, but people found their way to gain access to the truth. 20 years later, Rojo Amanecer, a movie that recounts that awful day when the army killed hundreds of student protesters, faced censorship from the beginning. With problems during its production, it was decided to be filmed secretly in an apartment, which later was regarded like a creative approach of the director. When it was finished, the cinematography direction banned it, and then after negotiations with the cast and the producers, and after some cuttings made by the Department of the Interior, a censored version was released. But then it also faced obstacles to its distribution. So back to the 2024 banda music controversy.
They are trying to ban banda in the beaches of Mazatlan, Sinaloa, Mexico, for the sake of pleasing white tourists who do not like the noise. Yes, you heard me right. In Mazatlan, Sinaloa, the city that's been referred to as La Cuna de la Banda, where you can find local musicians playing the genre in every corner, there is a growing movement of hotels, others in the tourism industry, and elected officials who are trying to regulate banda simply because some gringos just don't want to hear it. I'm sorry, but if you go to Mazatlan expecting for there to be silence and no kind of banda music at the beach, that's like going to Las Vegas and expecting for there to be no lights or casinos. That's like going to Paris, France, and expecting for there to be no Eiffel Tower. Or like going to Egypt and expecting to not come across their pyramid. Banda was literally born in the Mexican state of Sinaloa before many of us were even born. For decades, local musicians have made a living playing banda live at the beautiful beaches of Mazatlan. It's an attraction, it's tradition, it's culture. Mazatlan, Sinaloa would not be Mazatlan, Sinaloa without banda. It's unfortunate that now many of the local musicians' livelihoods are at risk. This is exactly how gentrification looks like.
Okay. So as we can see, as the girl told us, tourists were trying to denounce banda music as a detriment to their experience, while hotel owners claimed that banning banda music will protect the image of Mexico. Okay? So both of these groups were hiding behind the local government to enforce the censorship. Well, you'll be happy to hear that this attempt backlashed really fast because Mexican people responded with an overflow of videos like this defending their culture. In previous research, I found that travel channels on YouTube often present this country as a relaxing or an adventurous beach destination. The image of Mexico has become a commodity, and some tourists lack cultural sensitivity whenever they try to get what they think they paid for. In these travel channels, when not excited from the frame, Mexican people are in the background of the beaches, almost unnoticed. But as you can see over here, the musicians of Banda Sinaloense are loud, they are bulky, and they are colorful. So believe me, you will see them and you will hear the music from a very long distance. So noticing that they had the people's support, musicians in Mazatlan organized themselves to make a demonstration against the prohibition, reminding us something very important, that if someone tries to silence you up, your answer should be louder. Okay. Now, I would like to give an addendum. That was the end of the presentation, but I would like to give an addendum regarding the flow of information in Mexico nowadays with the capture of El Mencho that happened a couple of days ago. Yesterday, I interviewed the head editor of El Siglo de Torreón, an independent media that operates in northern Mexico, in Coahuila. And she said that although it was a tough Sunday with 256 reported blockages and up to 90 people dead, they haven't dealt with censorship yet. apparently the information is flowing easily, but they have to be cautious because there are mainly two narratives that are populating the news report. One of them reporting the country as a failed state, and the other one reporting a full stability ambience. This is because the major newspapers are also working as information agencies for all the independent media. So they have to go to international agencies or to monitor social media by themselves and then contrast every information and do artisanal checkup for fake news or artificial intelligence of the things that are reported on social media. And well, this is because we are looking at what we are looking at now is not sensory per se, but a different phenomenon where an overflow of content reinforces an idea over the other. And this might be what happened also with the banda music controversy, where the overflow of the videos of Mexican people helped to get the other idea stronger than the other. So well, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. This is actually the city of my birth. I left when I was around 4 or 5 years old. I haven't spent much time in Chicago over the years, but it's a pleasure to be back, and it's a pleasure to learn from my fellow panelists tonight. I'm going to be sharing a very different kind of case study regarding censorship, and it's something that also has a personal angle where I became pulled into this case. And this goes back a couple of years, about 6 years, to the beginnings of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I should mention, besides being a scholar and a professor, I'm also a literary translator. And so over the years, I've translated numerous novels. And there's a novelist based in Wuhan, China, named Fang Fang, who I had been working with. She had a novel that I was in the middle of translating. And when the COVID-19 outbreak began, she became perfectly positioned to document what was happening. And so Fang Fang began writing a blog every day on the internet about what she was hearing, seeing, experiencing regarding the outbreak. And this blog went viral, and it had first a few million readers, then 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, and it became the kind of clearinghouse for people in China and Chinese citizens, expatriate Chinese all over the world, to kind of log in and get a real sense of what was happening, not the politicized version, not the whitewashed version, not the Chinese Central Television version, but a really honest account about what was happening on the ground. And people started referring to it as Wuhan Diary. It was written over the course of 60 days from January 25th to March 25th, 2020. It's self-published, and it started being presented on Weibo, which is a very popular Chinese social media platform. But then when it was shut down, she would migrate to other platforms, notably WeChat. And then when her WeChat account was shut down, there was a kind of chain reaction where other people would open accounts specifically to post her blogs. And so it was a relay of sorts where people were really working hard to get this information out. And she chronicled what was happening during this early phase of the pandemic. This is when the word COVID-19 didn't even exist yet. People didn't know the level of transmissibility. People didn't know how many beds were available at local Wuhan hospitals. And so there was a lot of uncertainty, and she became this kind of bright light that people went to hear what was happening. She's posting late at night between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. And the entries are kind of difficult to characterize because they're a mix of quotidian, everyday events, how she gets dog food to feed her dog and things like that. Information from local hospitals about the situation at various hospitals, how many beds are available and such, that she's getting from doctor friends that are calling her and texting her, and she's passing on that information. And then there's also these remarkable passages about things like censorship and calling the government to task and calls for accountability. especially where there are certain shortfalls or there's misinformation or people are being unjustly persecuted for speaking out about what's happening. Those are kind of remarkable because people in China usually, especially an established writer, isn't going to say those kind of things. But she said those things. And initially, this diary was very much embraced by, I think, civil society, a lot of cultural critics. Just a few quotes about the initial reaction of this diary. People always talk about what literature means, it being an enterprise centered around dignity. What does that mean? This is what it means. Or tried to document a reality living amid a besieged city and her feelings. She alone built a virtual wailing wall for all of us online and gave us a luxury that is quite rare in China, truth. And keep that word in mind, truth. These are kind of more quotes lauding her. Had there not been Fang Fang, what would we have seen? What would we have heard? There are all kinds of accounts like this about the diary. And what eventually happens is this diary sparks this nationwide political fissure, a debate. And there were certain preconditions that had to be in place for that to happen, one of which was the massive readership. Of course, anytime you have an authoritarian government and a massive readership emerges, it can be seen as a potential for destabilization or a potential threat. And these calls for accountability, coupled with that, kind of increased the risk, so to speak, because when she's calling the government to task, asking them to take responsibility, to apologize for their mistakes, for government officials to resign for various actions that they took, that has a kind of explosive possibility. There's also a history of ultra-leftist groups. Left and right are opposite in China than here in the West, I should say that. So when we say ultra-leftist groups, these are extremely pro-communist groups attacking Fang Fang ever since 2017. And they'd been following her. And when this diary went viral, the thing that trolls need most is a host. And she was a very powerful host. And so they kind of went after her. And what came out of that was this unprecedented level of cyber attacks carried out on a number of different levels. And it took a variety of different forms. And I got pulled into this because I was the translator. I put aside our novel. I started translating this diary. And it was the act of translation that triggered these attacks being taken to a new level. And I'll try to break that down, why that happened and how that happened. But she was front page headlines in major news magazines at the height of this controversy. And the attacks are focused on a number of things. One of them is claiming that what she's writing is all hearsay and secondhand accounts. Now, of course, she's quarantined in her house. And so everything she writes, she's getting through her phone. She's not a frontline worker. She's not in the hospital. But they latched onto, the trolls would latch onto this and claim that this was therefore disinformation that she was spreading. And basically what this is going at is this notion of authenticity. And if you remember a moment ago, I showed how various cultural critics highlighted the aspect of truth-telling that she was heralded for. So that's what they went after. And they tried to break down that reputation that she was someone telling the truth. And instead, they started conjuring a whole series of names, calling her the Witch of Lies, and trying to create this new narrative and using conspiracy theories to do that. So there was a whole series of conspiracy theories that started to circulate around the book, saying that the book was actually produced by the CIA or the FBI in the United States. There was one conspiracy theory that it was the U.S. Freemason Society that had orchestrated all of this. Another one that I was the secret author and that she was just a puppet. And I was actually writing all of this as an action to hurt China and to defame China. Keep in mind, this is all happening against the backdrop of a very intense period in Sino-US relations. Trump is calling COVID the China virus and Kung flu and using this type of racist language to escalate tensions between these countries, and that's the backdrop. And so this became, once news of a foreign translation, let alone a US translation by an American translator, broke, this became a perfect method of distraction to turn people's anger and frustration away from what was happening locally to the United States, to this conspiratorial action that was playing out. There were personal attacks on Fang Fang's family or finances and her exploitative motives, claiming that she was only writing this to get rich and to make money. And how are the attacks waged? Well, it's a very sophisticated campaign that spins out of this, and it plays out on a number of different levels. Social media attacks, disinformation campaign, and employment of using the word fake news to discredit legitimate news. That might sound familiar to some of you here in the US. Silencing of stories and individuals who were defending Fang Fang. They weren't just silenced, but they were attacked, sometimes very viciously, sometimes even official investigations launched by their place of work or dismissed from their place of work. Pressure to suppress publication of Wuhan Diary. And so right now there's 20 foreign language editions of Wuhan Diary around the world. There's no Chinese language edition. It was banned in China, it was banned in Hong Kong. Her contracts that she did have were canceled forcibly, and it was very much whitewashed from the internet. And then there was this employment of pop culture, academic culture, to discredit Fang Fang and what we would call flooding, that is coming from every direction possible. And then, of course, those voices to support her are being suppressed. And so these work hand in hand with one another. And then this amplification of anti-Fang Fang narratives and this inundation of official narratives to replace it. So I'm going to show you very quickly what some of this looks like kind of on the ground. This is actually my personal Weibo account, my social media account in China, what it looked like on April 8th of 2020. And so some of these are, I don't know if you can see them, but your son will die in 3 days. Fuck you, white pig. You motherfucker. Fuck off. Fuck your mom. Shame on you. Shame on you. American liar. Check how many poor American people died because of your government's stupidity. And this is just, the tip of the iceberg. Thousands and thousands of these messages. And I should also mention that what you see there is nothing compared to what Fang Fang got. I'm just the sidekick, so to speak. Fang Fang's social media page, you can't bear to read what that looked like. Tens of thousands of death threats, threats of sexual violence, attacks on her family, her children. So brutal. And so that's actually the tame version of all of this. And then official media accounts. This is Global Times, an official state media platform in China. These are just a series, maybe a half a dozen or so headlines attacking Fang Fang. So the social media attacks are being echoed by official government platforms like Global Times. These are pseudo-academic publications that were pumped out overnight within a matter of a few weeks or days attacking Fang Fang. And they are all of this is happening in mid-April of 2020. It's orchestrated very carefully across these different areas in a very short period of time. And these are full-length academic monographs that they're published as ebooks and released online in very short order to try to discredit the author. I don't know if you know what these are. They call them in Chinese 大字报, or big character posters. This is during the Cultural Revolution in 1966 to 1969 or so. These were very prevalent in Chinese society as they're basically political denunciation posters. And you haven't seen these in China for decades, but amid this moment, in mid-April 2020, in Fang Fang's home of Wuhan, big character posters start going up in public, denouncing her, calling on people to seek her out, to punish her, in some cases to kill her. You also start getting these types of Cultural Revolution era artwork and posters circulating online. This says, down with the imperialist running dog and national traitor, Fang Fang. Calling someone a traitor to China is about the worst crime you could be accused of. This is a social media group called the Little Red Soldiers, and this one says, who will be next? Keep watching Fang Fang's circle of friends to find out. So this is an open threat that if you stand by Fang Fang, if you support her, we will come after you as well. And indeed, this is just one such example. This is Wang Xiaoni, who is a very well-known Chinese poet, professor, writer, intellectual. She stood up for Fang Fang. This is an official notice by her university, Hainan University, announcing an official investigation into her conduct and speech because she stood up for Fang Fang. And then it starts getting very weird. These are anti-Fang Fang diss songs that start being circulated on the internet and social media. This is a song by Jay-Z and Alicia Keys called New York State of Mind that was redubbed with anti-Fang Fang lyrics. This is another one by an artist named Bo Peep, also in mid-April, professional production values. It's a beautiful song in terms of the quality of the vocals and everything, but if you read the lyrics, it's all about Fang Fang, the translation of the book, the conspiracy theories, and so all of this starts playing out. Political art, this is Fang Fang rendered as a court jester holding a book that says the Book of Lies. If you can read that, it's covered in blood. And then there's a knife there, and that's part of one of the conspiracy theories was the so-called 地道者论, or passing the knife theory, that by writing this diary, Fang Fang was passing a knife to the United States that they would use to hurt China, and in terms of this COVID controversy. So here she is handing the knife to an American general who's crowning her with a dog collar while the international media are kind of eating all of this up. More political cartoons about Fang Fang. This is, on the left is a very famous Tai Chi master in China who went viral for calling on fellow martial arts practitioners to find her, track her down, and kill her. And then the man on the right, Xu Xiaodong, he made another viral video calling on martial artists to find her and protect her. And so this is kind of the weird part of how the story goes. And so to step back and ask, why all of this played out and what was at stake, and a lot of it had to do with who gets to control the narrative during this very crucial time, which at the moment, many people were calling China's Chernobyl moment with the beginning of the COVID outbreak, and this issue of accountability, which again led to this possibility of this destabilization. And then there were these issues in the international media about international reparations, the origin of the virus, US-China political tensions, which I must emphasize have nothing to do with the diary. She never mentions any of those three topics. And yet in the conspiratorial discourse that surrounded the book, they became central themes to attack her, to discredit her, and kind of pull her into this. And then a big part is, of course, distraction. Because if you're busy attacking Fang Fang and me and the United States government, you're not going to be focused on your own government's failings or shortcomings vis-a-vis what was happening with the virus. But in some sense, the real story here is that Fang Fang's story tapped into a larger debates about civil society in China itself. That is, do you want an authoritarian leadership that won't let a 65-year-old woman publish her personal diary about being under lockdown? Or should we all just shut up and wave our flags and do whatever the president tells us? And there was a real split in society about what was the ethical choice in a situation like this. Eventually, it leads to this kind of bifurcation. And so internationally, there are many, many versions of Wuhan Diary that are available. In China, it's been replaced by these Wuhan diaries. These are official diaries that are very propagandistic, flag waving, saying what a great job the government did. And so although Fang Fang's diary has not only been erased and completely smashed, and her reputation has been tarnished, she has been banned, her works are completely unavailable now. She was a veteran writer who's published over 100 books, and now none of them are available. And so her voice, while her voice is silenced, there's all of these alternative Wuhan diaries that have kind of, and you can see how many of them are, even children versions. But stepping back and having gone through this kind of alongside her, I think there's a lot of lessons that I took away personally, and I think a lot of us can take away in terms of this importance of accountability. And even Fang Fang living in an authoritarian regime under that system and facing death threats, facing daily attacks, people throwing bricks into her courtyard where she lives, and yet she did not waver. She continued documenting what she was seeing. She continued writing. But in doing so, it also documents the fragility of civil society and how important it is for individuals to take up that responsibility. Also the destructive power of disinformation. I hate to say it, but propaganda works. And especially in a system where social media is so tightly controlled as China, and when voices of support are suppressed and those others attacking her are elevated, it's hard to even blame people who are attacking her or even attacking me when they're only getting one perspective. They don't know there's another side to this story. And unfortunately, I think we're seeing social media here in the United States going in a very similar direction. But it really, I think for Fang Fang, she's become a kind of personal hero to me. And I think because of her courage to bear witness, to speak truth to power, it also kind of restored my faith in literature. I mean, who reads literature these days? And here's someone who wrote a book that really made an impact and changed people's lives. It infuriated some, inspired others. And it made me also think, what do these trolls want? All of these thousands of death threats I'm getting, they want to shut me up. They want to intimidate me. They want to get you to stop what you're doing. And so my response was to double down. And so I finished the diary. That's the version by Harper Villa. It's a vision of HarperCollins that was published. But then I did something else. I actually documented the whole disinformation campaign and shined a light on these trolls and everything that happened in the book on the left. And then I went on and I continued translating Fang Fang. And so I've translated 2 more books by her, including On the Right Soft Burial, which is a book of hers that was banned in 2017. And that's where the attacks first began on her. And I think this is kind of the way up, that you can't give in to this and you have to double down. And there's a lot more. This is kind of the Cliff Note version of this talk. So I'm happy to break down other aspects of this and kind of reflect more broadly about the implications of this. But I'm going to stop here, and I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Well, I can start by just saying, wow, right? I mean, they're very discrete examples, but there's also interconnections between them. And yeah, so we're just going to open it up for questions. So, yes.
When I study universities, specifically I study if they are teaching erroneous or harmful ideas. We know that this is happening if the college practices censorship. The DePaul Republican student group a couple of years ago told me that they are not allowed to operate on campus. This is censorship. I love the university. Thanks. But this is proof that faulty ideas are being taught here. So my challenge to all the faculty here is prove me wrong. Invite me to dialogue. I am always civil. Break the censorship. Allow facts to be spoken. If you have the truth, then you want the opposition to speak so you can prove them wrong. Contact me at practicelovenotwoke@gmail.com. So where can I begin here at the university? Is there not even one of you who will defend social justice ideas?
Okay, we're going to take a few other questions and then we'll have a discussion. So we'll take 2 more questions. Comments?
I have a question.
Can you use the microphone?
Yeah. Thank you. I had a question for Sarah. I recognize the tactics that you were encouraging as the ones you wrote about and that ACT UP embodied and were very successful at getting things done. But I also, I'm worried about the idea that just protesting, people going out in mass and saying this is wrong, that's not effective. Because I feel like it brings people together, it motivates people to act, and not by itself, but with other actions, it seems to me to be really effective to generating truth, the fact that thousands and thousands of people are opposing what's happening. So I'd like you to speak more to that point.
Well,
if you can.
First of all, I want to say that we don't know how much resistance there is in the United States because there's no central place to find out about it. And I spent 6 months on book tour this year. I went to 29 U.S. cities, and every city I went to, there was stuff going on that I hadn't known about before I got there. Basically, I think we're in a moment where it's like we're a country of red states with blue cities. That's kind of where we are. But all of the protests do have concrete demands. ICE out, no war with Iran. I mean, there's just so much at stake, and people are very clear about what they want and don't want. So, but like, for example, a really good move was when the No King's Day became decentralized. You may know for years we would have these marches on Washington that were so expensive, and people would get exhausted, they would travel, and then you'd get to Washington to be Sunday, and all the things were closed anyway. But when No King's Day decentralized so that it's all simultaneous and it's happening on the same day, Then you have exactly what Lourdes is talking about. People identify who else in their town is upset about what's going on. People come together and create events. Because, it's local. I mean, every community in this country is under attack, and all the responses being localized is a lot more effective.
Hi, thanks so much for this. I'm sort of curious about the tension between needing to come together to kind of engage in a dialogue, to talk through some of these issues constructively, versus sort of like a co-optation of these spaces when maybe there's not a, when the dialogue can't move forward in a way because one of the other parties themselves is the one that's engaging in the censorship, if that kind of makes sense. Like when you have this, I guess this disconnect between like the power flows, how, I guess maybe just from your sort of vantage points, can we as citizens with sort of like limited access and power try to engage constructively in dialogue with some of these more powerful entities and systems that kind of don't want to give us the microphone, so to speak?
Do you mind if I jump in?
No, go ahead. But
Okay.
we can have others jump in.
Let me just say that the way that change happens in America is that most people do not participate one way or the other. And it's a critical mass. It's a small group of people who are effective, who actually create change. And trying to convince the people who oppose you to change their minds is often not an effective approach. However, it's worth debating in public so that you create a theater of ideas for the audience so that they can start to see what values are actually at stake. But you're not trying to convince someone who wants to deport everyone, who thinks that someone like Justice Kavanaugh, who believes that anyone with a Hispanic accent or who looks Latino has a right to be stopped and racially profiled. Trying to convince that person to think differently is not, I think, is kind of futile. It's all about amassing power for your constituency.
If I could give an example from the experience that I was talking about earlier, when this deluge of attacks became unleashed, of course, one of my first instincts is you want to respond and you want to say, no, that's not true, and correct all of this. But to some degree, it's just like getting in the mud and rolling around with pigs, because you're just going to get dirty. And the way the playing field is curated, it's not an even playing field, kind of what you were mentioning. And so what my strategy was to write a book, was to write op-eds at places like Washington Post, was to find reputable venues through which I could speak my truth and get my voice out. But playing the social media game felt like it was, at least in Weibo, in the Chinese social media environment, it felt like a losing situation. And so you've kind of got to pick your battles.
I'll just add to that. One thing is that Loretta Ross, who is a Black feminist organizer and coalition builder, she recently wrote a book called Calling In, How to Make Change with People That You'd Rather Cancel. But one of the things that she talks about is that if you just look at polar opposites, like people you totally agree with, and then there's people you can't stand, who you totally disagree with and you prefer to cancel. But she talks about that there's a lot of people in between there. And so making those groups more visible. So she says, like, on the left, sometimes we only want to be around people we agree with 90% of the time. And then we just fight among each other about we get in, have very little tolerance for the differences within that group. To Sarah's point earlier about, like, let's not make these smaller differences divide us. Let's keep it moving, right? But what Loretta Ross does is she talks about the importance of talking to people where you have 75% agreement, to build more bridges, to build more opportunities of expanding the people who are involved in the movements or the ideas or the way that you want to think about things. And she says even the 50%ers, you know, what are the links? So for her, it's like, how do you keep building in ways that doesn't mean like you're going to agree on everything, but where are their points of agreement, or where are there points of a more common vision for a future that you all want to have, even though you might have differences. Maybe that's the idea, again, to reference what Sarah was talking about in terms of radical democracy, you know, where you don't have to agree on everything, right? But you have a common vision of a world where everyone's welcome, or where everyone belongs, or everybody has food, or people aren't being terrorized, or, you know, people have a freedom from violence or something like that. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah. Brenda, did you have any?
Well, yeah. I will also add that when most of the time when you have these very, very radical differences is because you have learned them from I don't know, maybe from trauma, or maybe from another experience that is linked with your emotions. So if someone thinks different from you and you can dig into that and see what emotions are provoking that opinion, then you can understand better what's happening with the other person, and maybe you can create like a common ground to start dialogue. Okay.
I just want to speak up on behalf of the bottom line. I mean, I think, you know, we do have to work with each other, but you also have to know who you are and what you stand for, right? And I think everyone has a different bottom line. And that's why there's never going to be one central analysis or one central strategy that we're all going to agree with. It's better if you and the people who have your bottom line do something that is effective towards your goal without trying to persuade everyone else to do it too, so that there's simultaneity of response, so that there's so many different kinds of campaigns and strategies and aesthetics going on at the same time. That's actually what creates the paradigm shift. Because trying to force people to all be the same doesn't work, and I think we've learned that.
Okay. Another question?
Thank you all for your talks, and thank you for your comments, especially on that last question. I also quite agree that we should be able to, even if we disagree on many, many things, be able to find points of commonality and be able to still manage to discuss things civilly. I really like the phrase fascist cataclysm. You guys provided many examples of that, but I felt that it was perhaps some of the examples were perhaps a bit divisive rather than unifying, which I think would be a great thing to seek. So I'll explain more of what I mean. But I think a large part of why the fascist cataclysm is allowed to progress is because we tend to have an allegiance to our teams rather than our values a lot of times. Not accusing you of that, but the public perhaps in general, or voters perhaps in general, something along those lines. But I think we have a lot of opportunities for unity right now. For example, with the Epstein files, I think we can all agree raping children is not something we should be supporting. And yet somehow with Pizzagate, it was fine. Well, it wasn't fine, it was fake news. That whole thing was censored. But in the case of Epstein, that's something that somehow it's allowed to talk about. But I think that if we stood on our principles rather than with our teams, we'd be denouncing both. Then on COVID and censorship are both topics that we're discussing. I think the COVID response here in America was also very authoritarian. We definitely experienced a lot of censorship, including on social media, which you mentioned specifically as being something that was so prominent in China, but we had that here as well. And just briefly an example, and then I'm going to get to the point. I know I'm going a little long, I apologize. Thank you for listening.
Wrap up.
Yep, working on it. So with COVID, there was definitely another perspective that was out there, but it was censored just as an example with the safety of the shots. There was information that we should fully expect that there's every reason to be skeptical of the safety, and it's now confirmed by autopsy that it has indeed killed people, which would have been no surprise to people if they were exposed to that information at the beginning. So, yep, my question is, wouldn't check the autopsy studies, but my question is just, would you guys, thoughts on that generally, but then also, would you guys agree that we'd be better off if we were able to stand on our principles and connect that way?
Well, I'll just say that, like in the COVID context of COVID and then what I laid out in my presentation today, I mean, one of the reasons I felt it was so important to document what happened wasn't necessarily, part of it was to have the accurate historical document of that incident, but at the same time, I saw so many of those same things that were employed vis-a-vis political extremism, disinformation in China, also seeing shadows of that here in the United States. And I think, and the whole last chapter of the book, I draw parallels between the two. And so I do feel that it's important to, apply the same standards everywhere and to not just demonize one side or the other, but also to look within. And I think going through that situation, a big part of it was also the level of introspection that it led in terms of having a more critical perspective on how social media functions, government functions, et cetera, et cetera. And so many of the tools that were employed in the disinformation, the campaign against Fang, I'm seeing right here at home all the time, and increasingly so. And so, I will end with that. Thanks.
Okay, other questions or comments? Questions really would be best.
Sorry, I want to play the devil's advocate a little bit, because so if we are talking about free speech, we have to agree that the discourse is not all created equal. So, for example, there are, conspiracy theories such as Pizzagate that harm society or the civil discourse. So, as a society, we do want to amplify, at least suppress a certain kind of conspiracy for the sake of have the democracy or sane discourse. Thank you.
Okay, here we have a question up here, and I think that might be our last question because, well, there's one right here. Okay.
We could take a couple and then have a
Maybe
fun
we'll take it,
response.
Leah, let's take the last couple questions and then we'll have comments from the panel.
Okay. Thank you for the presentations. I had a question for you. The version of radical democracy that you're sharing is interesting, is inspiring, but I also find it maybe a little bit elitist. So I want to kind of give you a chance to kind of clarify it so, I'm not that confused, because I think, politics is about creating consensus. It's not just finding a number of other people who kind of think like you and then finding a way to push your agenda forward. I mean, there's part of that. But then unless you persuade a lot, unless you create coalitions beyond, the people who just kind of are in your camp and have a vision of the future, not just kind of like going back to what it was before, but having an alternative, then, you're just kind of being stuck in an elitist situation where you kind of think, all right, the rest of society is passive, and if we can find a way of pushing forward and achieving our agenda, then that's a success. It's not necessarily so, because it's not kind of creating consensus among society. So, let me stop there because
I think you're totally misunderstanding where I'm coming from. I'm a historian of the AIDS crisis, and as a journalist, I covered AIDS starting in 1982. I wrote a 600-page book about how the activist movement ACT UP succeeded in transforming the AIDS crisis. And the AIDS activism was one of the most successful social movements in the 20th century, and it's worth trying to understand why they were so successful. And I interviewed 188 surviving members of ACT UP over 18 years. And like I said, I covered AIDS really since the beginning of the crisis, and I understand a lot of what went down. And the reason they were able to be successful is that they were not a consensus-based movement. Now, there's a lot of different interpretations of the word coalition. But to me, a coalition doesn't mean that everyone agrees on everything. It means that you have strategic agreement. And the reason that people differ on their strategic agreement is because they have different positions in the society and they have different, understandings of how things go, but they're willing to connect on one or two grounds. So AIDS activism was successful because you were allowed to disagree within a framework. They had a one-line statement of unity. You know how like sometimes people write these 5-page single-space things? That is not going to help you. The one-line statement of unity was direct action to end the AIDS crisis, and that was direct action as opposed to social service provision. That was the bottom line. If you had an idea that was direct action to end the AIDS crisis, you could do it. Now, if you and I were in ACT UP together and I thought your idea was terrible, we would yell and scream at each other. But in the end, I wouldn't try to stop you from doing your idea. I just wouldn't do it. We're still in the same organization. We still have the same bottom line. But then I go find my 5 people to do my idea. You have your people doing your idea with the same bottom line. And many other people are doing their ideas all with the same ultimate goal, but using different strategies and tactics. And that is what made it successful.
Okay, we have one more question.
Final question.
Thank you. I've got a question for Dr. Berry. There are all those millions of people who are following Feng Feng's diary in real time in 2020. I'd kind of like to know what's happened to them, what are they doing, who are they? Because, I think back to other events in recent Chinese history, like Tiananmen Square. A lot of people knew what was going on, and now 30 years later, you've got 30-year-olds who haven't heard of Tiananmen Square. You've got 30-year-olds from China who don't know who Ai Weiwei is. And I worry that in 10 years or more, people won't know what the umbrella movement was in Hong Kong. So, what's happening to that truth, that knowledge in China today?
Thank you. Yeah, so the discourse shifted very radically. It started out with this incredible wellspring of support. People called her, the voice of China, the conscience of Wuhan. And then when we get to around April and this disinformation campaign kicks in, public opinion does shift very radically. And all of a sudden, people really do start believing she's this traitor to China, that she sold herself out. She sold the book rights for all this money. And in reality, she donated every penny of her royalties to the families of frontline workers who died during those early days. But nobody reported on things like that. But she was very thoroughly demonized by the media, and most people started to believe it. And then the diary disappeared. And so all you could read was the negative coverage about her. And so I can't tell you how many people would come up to me and the first thing they'll say is, so I didn't read the diary, but I read this, and this. And so then they ask, so why would you translate such a thing? And basically what happened was the discourse was entirely shaped by the criticism that had been elevated. But then something miraculous happened, which was maybe a year or several months later, there was the Xi'an lockdown. And all of a sudden, people in Xi'an start texting on social media and posting, Xi'an needs a Feng Feng, or where is Feng Feng? And then the Shanghai lockdown happened, the same thing. And more people saying, like, who's still cursing Feng Feng now? Who's still going after her? Or those of you who attacked Feng Feng, do you regret what you said? And those kind of messages, hundreds of messages like that. And then the white paper movement, again, kind of the light shining through. And so there have been these moments, these critical moments when other people in other cities throughout China personally experienced lockdown, and then they realized, oh my God, she was right. And there have been several moments like that where the discourse really has shifted. And then there was one moment where Chai Jing, a very well-known journalist in China, did a kind of in-depth interview about all of this. And that also had an incredible impact on kind of shifting people who had once bought the lies, so to speak, or drank the Kool-Aid, and then they saw this other perspective. And so it is shifting over time, but maybe, I don't know if it's too little too late, it's hard to know. But there have been these moments of where the light shines through, and I hope we have more of those.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Let's thank our panelists. And let us hope similar lights shine through of the resistance to the, the authoritarianism that is all around us right now. So let us hope that, the continuing bubbling up of resistance strategies. So thanks everyone again.